Kyle Rittenhouse has scored a series of major victories in pretrial hearings. Now, it's no guarantee he'll be found not guilty, but it does show that it seems the judge is not playing games. The prosecutors are trying to label the individuals who lost their lives that night as victims. The judge says you can't do that. There is evidence that they were rioting, they were looting, and they were committing arson. And as such, they can be referred to in those terms, rioters, looters, or arsonists, but not as victims, as that's too loaded. We're trying to figure out whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense. Now, I've interviewed several journalists and witnesses who were there that night in Kenosha, and the story seems to be that this was an act of self-defense. Now, there's many who have said Kyle should not have been out there, and it was fairly irresponsible. In fact, the judge, because it's not all about just siding with Kyle Rittenhouse, has refused to drop the gun charge against Kyle Rittenhouse, in which case he could potentially face liability over shooting these men simply because it was illegal for him to carry this weapon. Certain legal experts have argued to me that's not necessarily the case. He's probably going to get those charges. He'll be acquitted of those charges, but we'll see. Nonetheless, people on the left are putting up all of the fake news in the world. They don't care about reality. They don't care about even the New York Times reporting on what happened that night. They're arguing to me that nobody was chasing Kyle. Nobody fired upon Kyle Rittenhouse, whether at him or in the air near him as he was being chased and his life was being threatened. They argue that these things didn't happen when the New York Times put together a timeline breaking down what did happen. Jury selection is soon. The trial is very soon. And we're already seeing leftists say that if Kyle Rittenhouse is acquitted, well, bad things are going to happen. And I think so. Which brings us back to the age-old Tim Cast question. Civil War, anybody? Civil War? When I see people like Cameron Kasky, high-profile activist from Parkland, refer to Kyle Rittenhouse as a white supremacist murder, which is a lie. Okay, Cameron, he's not the most important person in the world. He's just someone that I'm naming because I've seen his tweets going viral and he has a lot of followers. But this is a guy who doesn't care about the truth. Cameron did not talk to witnesses. He did not interview the journalists on the ground. And he doesn't care about the innocent people who were being affected by the violence that night, notably a 70-year-old man around the age of 70 who was bludgeoned over the back of the head and left bleeding on the ground. I'm sorry, that was the night before. These are the things that inspired people to come out. The New York Times documented what happened, and it's not perfect. I mean, it seems like people are trying to piece together what happened, but there was a lot of footage. We went over all of that evidence. We brought on 3 separate journalists who were there that night, including Richie McGinnis, who rendered aid to Rosenbaum, one of the men who lost his life. And he told us what he believes happened. Now, I believe he'll be testifying. And I don't know if he's got an opinion on the outcome of this trial, but I'll just say, based on everything I've heard, it was a dumb situation. I blame the police for a lot of it. But it seems like this was self-defense. Kyle Rittenhouse may have some criminal liability. A lot of people on the right are saying he's a hero. I wouldn't go that far. What we'll see. One of the things Kyle Rittenhouse has won in these pretrial hearings is that we now learn that as he was entering the scene, the police said, "It's good that you are here." You see, if there was some kind of criminal liability, perhaps they would have known, they would have shown it, and the police would have said, "Hey, you can't be here doing this." Instead, the cops were grateful that there were locals standing up to defend this neighborhood, this small town. The left has pushed incessant lies. Kyle Rittenhouse carried a weapon across state lines. Not true. They say he traveled across state lines for the purpose of X. He lives on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. It was not unreasonable for him to go to Wisconsin for work, which he did that day. Well, I know many of you may know the story, but we'll start off with the news and then work through the context. And then we'll talk about where that brings us, which is you're at a point where even MSNBC is asking whether or not we're facing a civil war. I think the answer is likely that we are. I don't know what it'll look like. I don't think it'll look like the 1860s. I say it all the time. But we just had Noam Chomsky come out, famed leftist, saying that people who refuse to get the vaccine should be isolated from society. And, well, if they want food, well, that's actually their problem. Interestingly enough, a bunch of leftists are like, Noam Chomsky has spoken to me, and I'm glad I was smart enough to listen to what he had to say. And now I'm smart enough to know not to listen to what he has to say. Noam Chomsky's lost the plot. But there are still many leftists who agree with him. calling for violent segregation and deprivation of food and resources. Let's read about the news on Kyle Rittenhouse. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member, and you'll get access to exclusive members-only segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, as well as Tales from the Inverted World. Yes, that's what everyone's been waiting for. We've had people say, I wanted a podcast discussing crazy ideas, not a show where you tell stories. Well, Tales from the Inverted World is a storytelling series. It's Tales from the Inverted World. But the member section is where Shane, our host, talks with various guests about these concepts, and that is the members-only segment that's coming up really soon. We've completed the first members-only segment. We're going to have a couple more once a week, probably every Sunday night. We'll put them up. And we have, oh man, it's going to get good. Tales from the Inverted World, Ghosts of the Confederacy, ghost stories, murder mysteries, conspiracies about what really happened after the first Civil War. Hopefully, if we just call it the Civil War, we don't have to call it the first one, but that'll be interesting. So become a member at timcast.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Let's read that story from ABC Eyewitness News. Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Wisconsin judge sets ground rules on evidence and use of force experts. This is huge, and it's resulted in a major outrage from the left. They say, a Wisconsin judge laid out the final ground rules Monday on what evidence will be allowed when Kyle Rittenhouse goes on trial next week for shooting 3 people during a protest against police brutality. I'm going to pause right there and say, you see how the media plays these games? It was a riot. They had set fire to several buildings. A man who I believe was in his 70s was bashed over the back of his head. Why? He was trying to save his store from looters and arsonists. And someone walked up with a rock and clubbed him over the head with it. And they call that a protest. They go on to say, ruling, he will permit testimony from the defense's use of force expert and on how police welcomed Rittenhouse and others carrying guns during the demonstration. Rittenhouse sat silently in the courtroom as his defense team and prosecutors argued that last-minute motions, what both sets of lawyers can and can't say in the course of the trial, was the subject of the intense debate. The 18-year-old is charged with killing 2 men and seriously injuring another during a sometimes violent protest in Kenosha after the Jacob Blake police shooting in August of 2020. The then 17-year-old patrolled the streets with an AR-15 type weapon. I believe he was loaded with 223s, so that's, AR-15, probably capable of handling 5.56. That's irrelevant. One important thing that we learn is the man who survived, who took a bullet to his arm, had reportedly stated his only regret was not unloading into Kyle while he was on the ground. I hope the defense brings that up, assuming they can corroborate it and have this individual testify. Because if that's the case, it shows that Kyle Rittenhouse clearly was acting in self-defense because this man had the intent, the desire to harm him. The man who survived both the damage to his arm was holding what I believe was a 9mm. Quote, if more than one of them were engaged in arson, rioting, looting, I'm not going to tell the defense you can't call them that, the judge said. The judge also ruled the 2 deceased men and the injured man could not be referred to as victims. The word victim is a loaded word, he said. Alleged victims, a cousin to it. Rittenhouse's attorney want use of force expert John Black to testify that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense. Prosecutors have asked Judge Bruce Schroeder to block Black's testimony, arguing that jurors don't need an expert to understand what happened that night. I actually think they do. I do. Schroeder told the attorneys that Black wouldn't be allowed to testify about what Rittenhouse was thinking when he pulled the trigger or whether he definitively acted in self-defense. I almost certainly am not going to permit an opinion from anybody on the ultimate facts of the case. Assistant DA Thomas Binger said if Schroeder allowed Black to testify only about the timeline of events that night, he wouldn't call his own expert to the stand. Defense attorney Mark Richards agreed to the deal. Binger asked Schroeder to bar a video that shows police telling Rittenhouse and other armed militia members on the streets that they appreciated their presence and tossing Rittenhouse a bottle of water. The prosecutor said the video would transform the trial into a referendum on police procedure that night when it wasn't relevant. Quote, this is a case about what the defendant did that night. I am concerned this will be turned into a trial about what law enforcement did or didn't do that night, Binger said. Defense attorney Corey Chirafisi argued the video shows that police felt Rittenhouse wasn't acting recklessly. Binger countered that the shootings happened after Rittenhouse interacted with police, but Schroeder decided to allow the video. If the jury is being told, if the defendant is walking down the sidewalk and doing what he claims he was hired to do, and police say, good thing you're here? Is it something influencing the defendant and emboldening him in his behavior? That would be an argument for relevance, the judge said. Jury selection begins 1 week from today, and the trial is expected to last at least 2 weeks. Strap in, boys, because this one's going to get pretty wild. John Curtis on Twitter tweeted, the judge previously denied prosecution's request to admit video of Kyle Rittenhouse's involvement in previous entanglements, as it had nothing to do with Rittenhouse's right to self-defense in a completely separate incident. In this exchange, the judge scolds the prosecution because they're trying to say it was just arson. That's all it was. Now, I believe the audio is imbalanced, but let's play and see if it works.
And if there were any evidence in this case, and I would love to hear it, because I haven't seen it, if there was any evidence in this case that Mr. Rosenbaum physically attacked anyone else that night, chased anyone else that night, assaulted anyone else that night, threatened anybody with a weapon that night, we can talk about that. But I don't hear any evidence to that effect. All we're talking about is arson. We're talking about being loud and disorderly. We're talking about, being...
I can't believe some of the things you're saying. I mean, all
we're
talking about is arson. Come on.
Arson to a dumpster. Arson to a dumpster, Your Honor? Yes.
Arson to, pushing towards a gas station, they claim.
Yeah,
whether it's or not.
He didn't push it towards a gas station. He pushed it in the middle of the road.
This idea, there's a zone where it's okay that it's unsafe south of Sheridan Road because the police are only going, or 60th Street, because the police are only going to that far south. So I guess everybody lives at his risk. Past that, I don't know what you're saying.
That's not what I said, Your Honor. And Mr. Rosenbaum did not push the dumpster towards a gas station. He, along with a number of other people, were allegedly putting things in the road to block the police Bearcats. That's what was going on.
Okay, all right. Let's talk. Let's say that's what it is. And
that has nothing to do with what he was alleged to have done to Mr. Rittenhouse. Has nothing to do with it. They have nothing in common.
Oh, that's interesting. So the prosecution is saying that one of these individuals was not pushing the flaming dumpster towards the gas station. He was just pushing it in the street to block the police. I wonder if setting things on fire could cause harm to someone else's life. And if that were only the facts of the case, would Kyle Rittenhouse be justified in acting in defense of others? I mean, you want to make that argument, prosecution? I get it. Look, they have to. This seems like the judge. He's like, come on. He's like, as if there's a zone where it's safe to set fire to a dumpster and push it anywhere. Well, it sounds to me like the prosecution is desperate. I mean, they're desperate. Look, it's their job to try and prosecute this case that never should have been brought to trial in the first place. And this is why I'm worried that Kyle Rittenhouse actually will get convicted. Now, the judge, this is a good sign. I will revise my previous predictions. I said before, I thought Kyle Rittenhouse would get life because I don't think these people have the spine to stand up for the mob that is threatening to come for them if they don't sentence Rittenhouse to life. But now seeing this judge, I'll walk it back a little bit. Maybe Rittenhouse actually will get a fair trial. The problem now is the jury. Is the jury going to accept that a violent mob will come for them unless they give the mob what the mob wants? I'm not sure a jury can withstand that. Right now, what we're hearing is pretty intense. Already people are tweeting that bad stuff's going to happen. In fact, I can't even show you some of these tweets, what they're threatening to do, threatening violence against people. When it came to Derek Chauvin, what did they do? Armed guards had to escort jurors in amid active riots. And that was considered a fair trial? Absolutely insane. So where are we going? Somewhere dark, I would say. Somewhere absolutely dark. I'm going to show you this. This is from Fox News, October 5th. Kyle Rittenhouse case. Wisconsin judge refuses to toss weapons charge. This judge is not being blindly favorable to Rittenhouse. Wisconsin judge denied motion to drop possession of dangerous weapon charge by person under 18. The judge is seemingly doing a decent job. I think most of us would want the judge to just be like, we're throwing this out, case dismissed, Rittenhouse is free to go. But the reality is there should be a trial. This is how we sort through things. Rittenhouse is presumed innocent until proven guilty. There are fears about whether or not this can be a fair trial. We'll see how the jury handles this. I mean, we learned that some of the jurors in the Chauvin case were biased well after the fact. And it's partly on the defense attorney. Will Kyle Rittenhouse have a good enough lawyer? Honestly, I think he will. I think Rittenhouse has substantial support from the right over this one. Donald Trump once pinned a tweet to his Twitter account much before he was banned. This was last year. And it was my tweet. Donald Trump's only pinned tweet for a long time was mine. And I said that Kyle Rittenhouse was one of the reasons that I decided to vote for Donald Trump. And it was because I watched the videos. I read the New York Times evidence, this story here from the New York Times. I read what the New York Times said. This story about Rittenhouse, overwhelmingly reported by the left. And these version of events made it clear that this was an unfortunate incident, but it was self-defense. I don't believe Rittenhouse should have been out there. The rioters shouldn't have been out there first. The police should have been doing their jobs. But when all these things fail, self-defense. It's a bad story no matter what. You know, there are a lot of people who are saying positive things, you know, that they think Rittenhouse is a hero. And I'm like, guys, I think all of it was bad across the board. Some people are praising Kyle Rittenhouse's, you know, his like muzzle discipline or whatever. And I'm like, I didn't want any of the riots to happen. I didn't want the police to be out there. I didn't want Jacob Blake to get shot, even though that guy is not a good person. It's just tragedy across the board. But that doesn't mean we make things worse by just locking up some kid. But I read this story and I say, when they point out the first shooting was not from Rittenhouse, but that someone else had fired into the air, unclear why, Rittenhouse then turned around, very clearly being chased and trying to flee until someone fired around. And that's when he turned, probably believing that those who were chasing him were trying to kill him. So I don't want to see this kid go to prison over this. It's an unfortunate circumstance. Seeing this, however, and then seeing the lies from the left, notably someone like Cameron Kasky, who I'll, shout it again, prominent leftist individuals who refuse to read the news, who don't care about the truth, demanding some kind of retribution over perceived slights. It shows me that we are headed down a dangerous path. And it said to me that should Joe Biden get in power and give the power to the angry mob, we're in serious trouble. And that's what he's doing. The economy is being burnt to the ground. Joe Biden's vaccine mandate is going to cause major collapse of the trucking industry that's already short 80,000 drivers. And then the left comes out and says it's now Biden's fault. He's the one who's coming out with this vaccine rule. The Truckers Association in Canada and the U.S. are begging them to stop because so many are going to quit their jobs. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. It's his policy. It's his plan. And that's what happened. Joe Biden got in, and that is what we see. We now see the left adamant that Alec Baldwin did nothing wrong because the cognitive dissonance is so insane. I have to assume that this can't be on accident. These people have to genuinely know they're lying and manipulating and tricking people. I can point you to the video and say, here's why I think what I think. Here's the New York Times saying someone else fired first. They say into the air. Other witnesses told me it wasn't into the air. It was towards Rittenhouse. All right. I don't know for sure where it was fired, but I understand why someone hearing a gunshot and being chased would turn and confront those chasing them, thinking they were now going to die. The left won't show you the evidence. They'll just say, believe me or else. And if they do have quote unquote evidence, it'll be misconstrued. I'm using the New York Times, hardly a right-wing outlet. It's a left-leaning outlet. They will lie, cheat, and steal. The facts of the case in the Alec Baldwin story. We have this from Legal Insurrection. Alec Baldwin's situation beginning to look a lot like manslaughter. This is from Andrew Branca, who says, relevant facts assumed to be established. For those of you who don't know the story about Alec Baldwin, he was handling a gun on set for a movie, and he shot a cinematographer and the director, killing the cinematographer. They say, here are the relevant facts. That it was Alec Baldwin who was manipulating the gun that fired the projectile that killed Miss Hutchins. that the gun discharged because the trigger was depressed by Baldwin, not because of defect. They said it was a prop gun, it was a misfire, and it was a blank. Now we know it was a real gun, loaded, and Alec Baldwin pulled the trigger. That the muzzle of the weapon was directed toward Miss Hutchins by Baldwin when it was fired. That she was not killed by unpredictable ricochet. The gun contained a live round. That Baldwin had the opportunity to inspect the weapon for live ammo before he directed it. And of course, there was no justification for the shooting. None. Separately, we are assuming for the purposes of today's analysis that Baldwin did not intend to injure Mrs. Hutchins. If such intent to harm were established, we'd obviously be looking at much more serious charges. So let me make something clear on the Baldwin case. The gun had been negligently discharged 2 times before, according to official reporting. Crew had walked off the set due to the danger. A previous armorer said it was too dangerous and I won't be involved in this. Alec Baldwin was trained. He has handled weapons on numerous occasions in various movies. We're at 4. And 5, Alec Baldwin, as a producer on the set, is ultimately responsible for all of this. And then 6, as the man wielding the weapon, did not check, knowing his training, did not check, knowing negligent discharge of live rounds before, presumably live rounds, I should say, based on previous reporting, did not check, pointed the weapon at this woman, pulled the trigger. And they will say Kyle Rittenhouse is a murderer and a white supremacist, and that Alec Baldwin was just an accident. This is why I say civil war. Because these people don't care about actual justice. What they care about is tribal victory. Alec Baldwin's on their side. It was an accident. It's fine. Ignore it. They say, how could Alec Baldwin be in trouble, but President Trump isn't in jail? And I'm like, what do they have to do with each other? If you have evidence against Trump, by all means, let's lock him up. But great. Let's talk about it. With Alec Baldwin, I mean, look at the facts in the case. And then we look at the facts of the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, and he was being attacked. Flaming dumpster, all that jazz. It doesn't matter. What they want, and they will take. Let me show you this tweet from Andy No. He says Kyle Rittenhouse's trial begins in November. One person tweeted, if Kyle Rittenhouse walks, the U.S. is going to effing burn down. Absolutely no one is going to take that ish. It'll be last summer all over again, if not worse. And then we have someone advocate for causing physical harm to Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm not familiar with yourobserver.com. I just searched for the latest stories on the potential for a civil war in this country. They write, we know how this story will end. What we are living in the U.S. isn't a new tragedy. It has occurred throughout history. The result's always the same: misery, destruction, slavery. In the end, the socialists' utopia never works. By Matt Walsh. Okay, so this is Matt Walsh's publication, I suppose. Editor and CEO. Surely this is all just a bad dream. At the daily onslaught of national deterioration at the hands of the Joe Biden administration, if only that were true. But it is real. And this is no exaggeration. We are all participants, unwilling and willing, in the disintegration of the greatest democratic republic in the history of the world. Our federal government is a disaster. People running it are ruining the nation we love. What's more, how can anyone refute that we are in the midst of a second civil war? This time it's not a war between the states. It's a war of beliefs between delusional socialists who want complete power over our lives and ordinary Americans who want liberty, who want to be left alone to live in peace, work and raise their families, and who believe, as Jefferson stated, a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, namely, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is a war of coercion versus liberty. The left would tell you that they are justified in burning down cities and that anyone who stands up to them is a violent murderer who should be locked up. Then they'll tell you the cops are all bad and that prisons should be reformed. In democratic cities, they'll release the prisoners, citing a pandemic, but then arrest a salon owner and lock her up. And it's only after intervention will that salon owner be released. If you haven't been paying attention to what's been going on, then, well, I'm glad you're here now, to say the least. Noam Chomsky. He said that those who refuse to be vaccinated should be isolated from society, and for food, well, that's actually their problem. Big mistake, Noam. Chomsky. Truckers and farmers, they're Trump supporters. So the reality is, if you want to isolate those who disagree with your mandates, it'll be you who's without food. Don't you see where this is going when someone like Noam Chomsky becomes so insane? Have you felt it? I just can't believe it when I go on social media what people I've known my whole life are willing to say to other people. It's crazy. I feel like we're in Ghostbusters 2. Did you ever see it? Come on. What a great movie. Ghostbusters 1, obviously better. But in Ghostbusters 2, there's this slime bubbling up in New York because people are becoming increasingly angry and nasty. And the vile energy, the negative emotion, makes the bubbling mass grow. And it makes people more and more angry. That's what I feel like is happening. Don't you feel it? I saw a friend of mine from Chicago, back in the old days, someone I've known my whole life, post something like, Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense. And then one of our neighbors, someone who lived a few blocks away, posts, "You're a crackpot wingnut, you despicable, you Trump maggot, blah, blah, blah." And I see things like this. And I'm like, dude, you guys used to hang out together. Brother against brother, as it were, wasn't it? When I see that stuff, I'm just like, people are ready for blood. Now, it could be that when it comes to social media, it's much like dogs barking through a fence. You ever see that? There's like a fence and two dogs are yelling at each other, and then they open the fence and the dogs are like, I don't want to fight, actually. That was stupid. When people meet in real life, they actually don't engage in this kind of hate and vitriol. The Trump Jr., I think it was one of them, they're selling a shirt about Alec Baldwin. I think it's in bad taste. Some people are of the opinion that you have to absolutely go at the cathedral and their lackeys and just annihilate them, no holds barred and all that stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know, man. The ends don't justify the means because you never meet the ends. But if we really are destined to major conflict, and I think we are, we saw anti-mandate protesters at a hospital and Antifa came and beat them up. Since when were the anti-fascists working on behalf of the state? Seems a little weird, doesn't it? That's where we're going. We get a judge in the Rittenhouse case who seems to be acting rather fairly. These guys were these guys were rioters and looters. They can be called that. There you go. And if they were instigating or involved in a fight, then the word victim shouldn't be included. I agree with that. I actually think the weapons charge should be dismissed based on the legal analysis I've heard from lawyers who've had on the show and the law as I've read it and as it has been explained to me. The judge says no. Okay. That's what the judge should do. So it's not like it's lopsided, but it is going well for Rittenhouse in a variety of aspects. The funny thing is, when you finally get a fair assessment in pretrial hearings, you're excited about it. Like, oh man, good things are happening. It's like, it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't assume that judges will just cower. In this instance, it sounds like we got a judge who ain't taking nothing from nobody. Wow. That's a guy that I can respect. Unlike the judge in the Chauvin case, who was absolutely terrified of what Antifa would do to him. It's interesting. Antifa, the far left, Black Lives Matter, communists, socialists, etc., they use violence for political ends, and it works. And we're getting nothing from the FBI, from the DHS. They're not stopping these people. They're ignoring them. Meanwhile, Merrick Garland says he's going to go after parents. Parents who are upset that their child was assaulted in school. And what? They're the bad guys. The parents are the bad guys. I'm telling you right now, my friends, this is not about policy. We are facing an existential crisis. That's why they say right wing, left wing. They try and claim Tim Pool is right wing. And why doesn't Tim Pool talk about policy positions more often? Okay. They want to say I'm right wing. Why? Because if you don't support their revolution, you are, as it were, it was in the French Revolution, on the right. That's what it meant. The left means pro-revolution. The right means not revolution, I guess. And that's really what I think they're trying to say. When they're trying, because people can't really agree on language, they'll try and say that you or I are right wing. But I ask you, what does that mean? They demand that, well, Tim, we can't call him left wing unless he makes a bunch of videos explaining his positions and being mad at Republicans. But Republicans haven't done anything. Republicans aren't doing anything. They're just kind of obstructing, I guess. But what policies are they working on? Are they defending the right of free speech? That's a right wing issue? Sure. Whatever. freedom, liberty, life, the pursuit of happiness, these are considered right-wing now. That means the revolution seeks to take from you life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, your free speech, and basically all of your rights. If that's what the revolution seeks, it's a revolution that must be stopped. It is an attempt to take over. It is an attempt at a coup. We're seeing it across the board. This is very, very worrisome. Over at the New York Times, we have this story. It's called Kyle Rittenhouse and the New Era of Political Violence. And they get so much wrong. The thin blue line and Boogaloo had in common was they stood against the forces they believed were gathering on the left to erase the idea of America. A lie. The Boogaloo Boys march with Antifa on more than one occasion. They're just anarchists. The New York Times has to lie. They say all of these things we saw with the conflict between the left and the right, all these episodes looked in retrospect like stepping stones on the way to the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. I agree with that 100%. And I've warned over and over again, my friends, civil war. And people come to me and they say, Tim, you are wrong. And now I love it. On the right, the moderates, the independents, they'll say things like, I can certainly see how that's possible. Early on, it was conservatives telling me it was impossible there would be a civil war. That quickly changed, over the course of a year. The left still mocked me, saying it was dumb. They were mad. They were like, Tim's trying to make a civil war happen. No, I'm just reading the opinion of a Princeton professor. Sorry. I don't make these things up. I just read what other people say, and then I'm like, well, if they're saying it, right? I'm not some prophet. I certainly don't want it to happen. I'm scared about what China will do if the U.S. falls. But then the left, when they started mocking me, now I just say January 6th, and they go, oh, well, harumph, I guess. Yeah. You didn't want to accept it before, but now you do. When it was your guys marching around shooting people, you were like, no, there's no civil war. Because we're taking over. And then January 6th happened, and they're like, uh-oh, looks like there is a civil war afoot. Which brings me to, actually, I don't have the story pulled up. I should have. The Project Veritas story. You should check it out. Phil Murphy of New Jersey apparently is saying no vaccine mandates. Undercover footage shows someone, I believe, working for his campaign saying as soon as he gets elected, there will be mandates. Because the moderates and the Republicans believe in their rights and whatever. That's how they say it. They will take from you your rights. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.